Let's bring in Sara Yael Hirschhorn, historian at the University of Haifa and fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute in Jerusalem. Sara, thank you for joining us. First up, how does this attack fit into the longer history of anti-Semitism and political violence in Australia and elsewhere?
Well, Australia has a community of about 120,000 Jews, which is only a tiny 0.46% of the Australian population. Up until October 7th, Australia was considered a highly safe location for the Jews. And in fact, many Holocaust survivors, perhaps the largest community of Holocaust survivors, settled in Australia after the Second World War. However, after October 7th, things took a very dramatic turn, and there have been a dramatic escalation in anti-Semitic activity. Only 3 days ago, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry published a report showing that anti-Semitism had risen fivefold in Australia over pre-October 7th levels, the highest rate of escalation of anti-Semitic activity in the entire Western world, with approximately 150 incidents a month. We're talking maybe 4 to 5 anti-Semitic incidents that they are documenting per day across Australia. So things have undergone a dramatic change since the October 7th massacre here in Israel, and unfortunately, today's deadly attack seems to have come after months, if not several years, of escalation and incitement.
I see, but at the same time, Australia was widely perceived as a place where Jewish communities could live and be safe from this madness. What happened?
Well, I think that's a question that Australian authorities are sure to be investigating. There has been a change in Australia's demography over the past 20 to 25 years. There's been increasing immigration from Asia and China, as well as the inclusion of more temporary visa holders, foreign workers and other kinds of people who are coming on shorter stays that may be overstaying their visas in Australia. That has changed the makeup of the population. She's becoming increasingly diverse, although Australia, of course, was an immigrant nation from its very beginning. And certainly the global trends of globalizing the Intifada and other such slogans have deadly ramifications across the globe. And unfortunately, Australia, even if it is very far from much of the rest of the West, is suffering from many of the same consequences of this kind of rhetoric and action.
Exactly. I want to stop here because I'd like to get your take on the role online radicalization could have played or is playing, you tell me, in reshaping extremism in Australia and elsewhere as well.
Well, we don't really know very much about the perpetrators of today's attack. There's only some speculation. We do know that the Israeli Mossad, the security service, had warned Australia on multiple occasions about possible Iranian-backed activity, as well as other kinds of extremism emanating from other points in the globe that might affect Australia, or that people might try to enter Australia in order to carry out deadly attacks. So certainly there is a global dimension to this, and some of this may be coming from online radicalization, which of course is a source of extremism in much of the West and certainly also in Australia. Yet Australia itself has had I think has suffered less from radical extremism than other parts of the West, particularly in Europe or the UK. So we'll have to be watching the story to try to understand more broadly what's happened in Australia and why now and not earlier.
I would like to leverage your experience and studies a little further. And as a final question, I'd like to ask you, how can countries and communities around the world avoid this from repeating itself? What can be done to avoid it in the future, in Australia or elsewhere again?
Well, look, extremism is a much broader question that pertains to many Western societies today. But if we're going to take the more limited issue of anti-Semitism, certainly in Australia, since October 7th, there's been an average of 4 to 5 anti-Semitic incidents per day that have been documented by Jewish communal sources. There was certainly a very strong apprehension of incitement beginning on right immediately after October 7th, where there are reports of large crowds chanting slogans like "Gas the Jews" outside of the Sydney Opera House. Up until last week, when thousands of Australians have been gathering on the street week after week in large demonstrations that, of course, are happening in other parts of the West that we see similar kinds of discussion about. That have threatened the Jewish community. There have been a dramatic escalation in attacks on houses of worship, including the firebombing of a synagogue in Melbourne only a few months ago, as well as a simply fivefold escalation in anti-Semitic attacks across Australia that the government, police, and other community authorities do not seem to be taking seriously. So I think we have to be very careful about the mainstreaming of rhetoric into action, and also from policy from the top will affect what happens, bubbling up from the bottom. So we need to be very careful when there is a documented pattern of abuse, harassment, violence, and extremism targeting the Jewish community, that authorities are taking note and are taking action both to stop it at a police and immigration level, but also through education to hopefully inform the next generation so that we will not see this continue into the future.
Sara Yael Hirschhorn, thanks. Great having you.
Thank you very much.